If we now go through the quarter, it's impossible we lose. So in the end, who is the most overrated speaker in the world? Probably Tejas. Who is the second most overrated speaker in the world? Probably Naomi. High burden means crazy.
Welcome back to the Structural Reasons podcast. My name is Nikki. I'm your host. This is going to be an interesting one that we are finally getting to do with some good news after the last European Championships. Obviously, we have Alek today, who is the most recent best speaker and Open champion of Europe and also World Open semi-finalist, Belgrade Worlds 2022, World Open partial double quarter finalist or whatever you call that shit in Madrid. Which obviously, as I'm putting these things like that, it's already an interesting story. But before we get all into that, Alec, how do you feel?
Very good. Uh, you know, Excited to finally be able to tell all my offensive debate takes. Very hyped.
Great. So we're prepping up to be an offensive one. Okay. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna not gonna set you up for failure. I'm gonna leave you to do the failure part on your own, and I'm gonna start with more mellow question, but one that I personally find very interesting. So I know that you like watching UFC. You follow some NBA. Not sure if you follow some other sports, but I know that specifically for this, for UFC and for NBA, you kind of like mm, getting more into the different personalities and what goes on beyond these sports. So, as a big NBA fan myself, I've always kind of thought about. This particular comparison between actual sports and debating specifically because at its core it's like people who are very competitive and they're trying to be the best in the world at something. So my question is very simple. It's kind of like two-part question. In your opinion, is there a room for comparison between sports and debating, professional sports obviously, and have you, throughout your debating journey, taken any inspiration or maybe advice or just something interesting from professional athletes when you are preparing for major debate competitions?
Uh, yes, absolutely, 100%. I think especially combat sports and debating are like a one and one almost. It's like people with different styles, one on one against each other, and all of these things. Team sports is a bit more questionable because the equivalence isn't as big because they aren't fighting each other and stuff like this. But I think especially I've always found combat sports to be incredibly, incredibly equivalent to debating. And the number one advice that I took from combat sports and I implemented into my debating, which was ironically when I became very, very good between Madrid and fucking Euros, is that in boxing, everyone always says, which I also watch, styles, not skills, make fights. Uh, which I always believed that in debating, the most important thing is to work on your skills. If you are good at rebuttal, you will win. If you're good at giving analysis, you will win. But what I began to realize is that there is a great degree of importance on how you do it, like what your style as a debater is. And I don't mean style as in how you speak, how you present yourself at things. I mean the choices you make on what to do and what not to do consistently. And that's when I decided, okay, my style is terrible. I should completely rechange every single aspect of my style. And I did this over the next 6 months. And I went from partial double whatever the fuck at Madrid to open European champion. So I took this sort of advice and applied it to myself. I think relatively well.
Uh, right off the bat, there's a lot of, I feel like, layers to unfold here. So I guess the first thing that I want to know is give me a little bit more context into how like UFC or boxing or fight sports work. and like give me an example of a specific comparison, or maybe like you were watching a particular fight or a particular fighter and you thought about like how they approach their game uniquely and kind of cross-referenced it to your debating, because I think a lot of people who haven't watched it, like I haven't watched a lot of fighting, I have some context, but I think that people who haven't really watched it won't really understand what you mean by uniqueness, because on a surface level it's just like people throwing punches, and maybe some do jiu-jitsu in UFC and other do other styles. So what's
Yeah,
really different?
yeah. I actually also think this is a big misconception in debating. The people just look at debaters and they're like, ah, they just do stuff well. But like the same way that you can obviously tell that Naomi has a different style to fucking you, for example. This is the most stark comparison I can draw. The same way like different fighters have different styles, both in the ways say they fight, standing up. Some are more defensive, some are more offensive, some focus more on knockouts, others more on decisions. The way they fight on the ground as well, some more with wrestling, some more with jiu-jitsu. Different styles cancel each other out. They have different weaknesses that you can exploit, and all of these things. Same thing with debating. People have styles and they make choices. These choices matter. They create their biggest strengths, they create their biggest weaknesses. And analyzing these choices is very, very important. Like a jiu-jitsu guy, is a different from a wrestler guy. A wrestler guy is better at like positional wrestling, a jiu-jitsu is better at submission wrestling. You don't know what this means. That doesn't matter. All that matters is there are different things which allow you to do different things when you're fighting. And you need to also apply this mindset to debating.
Yeah, this is actually when you say it, I've I really like this comparison because I had like fairly recently a conversation with an old debater that hasn't debated in a while. They haven't been really so much into the international scene or whatever, and they were asking me, okay, you guys are kind of known, and like Balkan debaters in general are kind of known for framing. What really is framing? And I thought about it, and the way that I could explain it the best, at least from my perspective, is actually framing is essentially quite defensive thing to do. It's pretty much building a wall from the ground up that you are preempting a lot of things that are probably going to be said, regardless of whether you do it by characterization or by explaining some other particulars about the round. And while you were saying this, I kind of figured if you were to talk about debaters as fighters, you would probably say, which is actually very funny if you think about it, the debaters like Naomi are very offensive debaters. They are like storming you on with a bunch of arguments, attacking you, and stuff like that. And actually, Balkan debaters and a lot of ESL debaters, maybe because they had to, the style is much more defensive, if you can label it somehow, because a lot of the framing stuff and the comparison and the way that argumentation is built is actually much more in terms of making sure that this particular thing sticks and that it's not easily refuted by the other side, as comparison to do more stuff but less qualitative in that type of sense. What do you think?
Yeah, I actually don't agree with this. I think that framing is one of the most offensive things you can do. Like, framing isn't necessarily to make your argument better, it's to frame that the other arguments exist in an unrealistic world, and ergo, your arguments exist in an irrealistic world. Like, what Milos does, I think, probably the best ever, if you watch his debates, is he bends the debate to whatever case he's running. He forces everyone else to fit into whatever he's doing, which I don't think is a defensive thing, right? Like, your case doesn't become less rebuttable. It just it makes the entire debate work around you. And what I think is the much better comparison in fighting that I found is that so in fighting there's two ways to win: on points, if you throw a lot of punches and get hit less than you throw, or by knockout, if you knock somebody out, destroy them, and all of these things. I find people like Naomi, like Matt Cato, like Tejas, point fighters. They win because they have more points than you, because they rebut your thing and don't get rebutted themselves. People like Milos win by knocking out the debate, right? You've seen a Milos speech where it's like obvious that he wins, that there is no room for any other interpretation and stuff like this. You don't even need to see what other people are running, because the way the framing works is it makes it so the debate can be this and only this. So I think it's not maybe defense the perfect analogy.
I mean, fair enough, fair enough. Like I like interpret it as kind of defensive. I don't necessarily think that defensive. For me, defense in sports has a very positive connotation. I prefer defensive players. I think being defensive in sports requires much more, let's say, understanding of the particular game that you're playing. I think this is true for basketball. I think it's probably true for anything else because I think in terms of reaction, obviously whoever throws the first punch, let's say it like this, even though I'm not so like if you attack in basketball in that particular sense. You always have the millisecond advantage because the other player has to react to what you're already doing. So they're already behind. And the only way to catch up is by figuring out what you're going to do before you actually do it, which means you have to think
Yeah,
more about the game in that particular sense. So that's what I meant by defensive. But I think that like the way that you explain it also works in the sense of that's why we call it framing in its definition. So the question that they have here is which is better in your opinion? Obviously, you're kind of biased, but try to like entertain both sides and give me the verdict because I think this is kind of like has always been and is right now even somewhat of a clash in debating of at the end of the day, like, do you just go for the points game or do you try to knock out the debate? Because knocking out the debate out of the park while it's flashy, like in an anime, it kind of sounds risky. You know, if you don't, if you're not able to do it, what do you do? So why is it worth it to do it as a strategy than what Naomi or Matt Cato does? Obviously, both can be successful. We've seen this, but if you are giving the recommendation to the average debater, what would you say?
yeah. So the political answer to this is both are different strategies that can work very well, and different speakers can utilize them, and some are better for one speaker, others are better for another. The real answer is I think it's much better to do our thing. I've never been the biggest enjoyer of the whole spamming thing, not on a moral sense. On a simply practical sense, it just doesn't look to me like the best strategy for a very simple reason. The problem with a lot of spammers, and I can't explain this to myself. You know, Miloš always said, I've said Miloš like 4 times so far. Miloš always says, if a spammer could like frame and do all of these things, they would be unbeatable. But I've never seen a spammer that can do this at a very high level, at least not in recent times. Maybe Tin with Lovro was the closest sort of to this, but even then, like not perfectly. If a spammer can't do this, then I think it's much riskier to spam than to try to knock the debate out of the park. Because sure, if you knock the debate out of the park, you could fail and you could be fourth, but you are, how do you say, the master of your own destiny. You control whether you are first or fourth or whatever. There is a version of things you can do where you can win always. That's what I found about myself. There are rounds where I'm really, really not supposed to win, that I can get up and kind of do something and then win. But spammers can't do that. They're entirely dependent upon the external things that occur. You can only win on points if there are more things to prove than another person. But what if the best team is your opening, which is, by the way, a known weakness of spammers? What do you do then? How do you force the victory if you can't rebut them, if they have ran a lot of these types of arguments? Or vice versa, what if you're opening and you run a bunch of shit and then a back half team gets up and frames the debate in a completely different way or weighs actively against you and something like this in a very sort of commanding way? How can you control this if your only strategy is numerical? So I actually think there is far greater risk present. Maybe not greater risk, but far risk that you can control much less when you're spamming. I myself have always enjoyed the things that Balkans do. I would recommend doing this to the average person. I think it's better for winning tournaments. And even if you look at it like historically, um, actually very few spammers have won majors or done something like this. Like they've often done very well, but very few have actually won. Maybe Tin and Lovro is really like the only example where again Lovro is not at all a spammer, or maybe Jason and Lichin, but again Lichin is not at all a spammer. Actually, vast majority of majors are won by people who run one argument in a very domineering way, like us, like Ateneo, almost you. 2 out of 9 judges believed you won before this as well. I think that both reality and the logical thinking shows that it's. I think it's a greater degree riskier to spam. It's not the strategy I would.
Yeah, I would agree. I think this also showcases why, in my opinion, BP is the best debate format. Just because the nature of the format with the four teams and the positions uh, allows this to happen and kind of forces this comparison. Because I think if we were talking about, like, not in particular world scores or 3v3, but just like two team formats, two team debates, I think obviously like you still have the nuance there, but you can get away with it more on average with spamming here than in BP. And of course, we're talking about like very high level debates. Like if you are good at one thing or the other, you're gonna win a lot of debates regardless. You've established that with the political comment. Fair enough. Let's move on with something that kind of also showcases some of your personality. So, for those who don't know, you're a huge debate nerd. And what do I mean by that? I've seen you go toe to toe with debate fossils like Harish, naming speakers and cases from back in the day that I personally haven't even heard of, and I've been around for quite some time. And it's really interesting. It's one of the reasons that I invited you as co-host in the Harish episode where we talked about like old debaters and stuff like that. So um, I think again two-part question. Obviously, I want to know the story of how that happened, but I also want to put forward the more interesting questions, and you can kind of think about it in the back of your mind while you're telling the story. What is an interesting debating history fact or stat or something like that that people wouldn't particularly know?
So, was the first question? The first question is what's an interesting stat or fact or something like this?
Yeah, and you can tell us about how you generally got into debating, into like
Yeah, I mean,
learning the history of debating and stuff like that. Because obviously, like, there's a lot of debaters who just watch stuff, but they don't really go so much in detail of like the old stats, who was different eras and things like that. Most people don't even know who won worlds 2 years before or something like that.
yeah. So I think that so the way I got into it was very simple. At the first tournament I ever spoke in Bulgaria, 2019, I was a 126th in the tab or something like this. It was very bad. Out of my like 150 people, so no bueno, as they say. Then between this tournament and the next tournament, I had like 2 months. And someone made fun of me for being 126th in tab. And I decided I would become the greatest debater of all time. So I spent the next 2 months. This is, by the way, after my very first tournament, watching old debates, like 2014 debates and stuff like this, when I was a small child. And this is where this whole thing began. I began to watch a lot of these things. I've always enjoyed it very much. What I found as interesting sort of observations when I watch it and I look back at it. What's an interesting thing that not a lot of people know? I think that uh, wh- a lot of debate things are lost through time because speakers stop like speaking, right? Like a lot of our conceptions of who the best debaters of the past were are just the people who stick around the most and stuff like this. um a very interesting debate thing outside of, say, 2013 EUDC final. You probably don't. It's okay. The one where Sally Rooney speaks. She's an author, Nikki. I also know you don't read. So so I'm just telling you here. In that round, Ashish and Ansaraf Tab win from closing opposition. Ansaraf Tab gives a much better speech than Ashish thinks it does, I think. And what I was very interested to find is, at the time, a lot of people actually thought Ansar was better than Ashish, but our conception of that team and of debating as a whole is formed that Ashish is much better because he stuck around in debating. And this is true for many, many things. Like if you go back and if you look at it, there are a lot of people who are like, or like another example, Helena and Sierzansky. Uh, this is maybe a hot take because I really like how Sierzansky speaks. Helena was better than Sierzansky. I'm sorry. She made better speeches. Just go back and look at it. But our conception of who was better in that team is formed by the person who stuck around longer. So I think that this is one of the more interesting things that how do you say that I always found out as I went back and watched debating. In terms of like interesting facts and stats, I don't know, man. I don't make statistical evaluations and stuff like this. But this is a sort of interesting thing I saw.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Like I've always thought about, uh, like for me, a very interesting factor stat as an example. I think like you gave an actual fact as an example, or like at least an opinion on a few of the teams, which kind of illustrated what I was trying to get at to anyway. But I think like always like one of the interesting facts is 2018 Mexico Worlds, where you have uh, essentially 1 point difference between first and second, between Dan Lehaf and Tayao. Even though like a lot of people would not even know Yao's name in comparison, like just a few years after. I mean, a lot of people who don't know shit about debating, I would say, but it is a fact that a lot more people know of Dan Lehaf in that particular sense. And a lot of people know that Dan Lehaf had a great run, like historical average in terms of like speaker points at that worlds, and that like brings up the notoriety, and like, hey, his teammate had only 1 point less. Like, do you understand? Like, everybody who has been to a debate tournament understand that's 1 point's difference. I would say even like 3 or 4 or 5 points difference. It's essentially just random luck. It's totally random whether one person or the other gets it. And from that perspective, you're like, okay, what actually happened at this debate tournament? Who was actually the
Yeah.
best speaker at that particular moment? Probably they were great, both of them, but the underestimation is interesting because a lot of people would go back and they would watch a Dan Lehaf speech, but maybe they should also think about watching an AI speech as well from that perspective. So that's what has made me curious, especially over time when I've gotten more and more into like my understanding of the game and my opinions on how the game should be played have obviously been exacerbated when I've achieved some things and had some confidence in my own style. So looking back at to what were the choices that people made has always been uh, quite interesting. Is there old debater that maybe not a lot of people know that you really like, or like an old speech that comes up to mind?
An old debater, not a lot of people know. I think a lot of people, which is very weird, that a lot of people maybe they know him, but they don't talk about him. You know who Darion Hotan is? The case,
Yeah, yeah,
you
I
know,
know
right? The
that.
KCOA guy at
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I think Darian is one of the least talked about speakers of that sort of middle generation between 2016 and 2020 and all of these things. But he was probably one of like the best. Like, I guess he never really had the major success. He was like a quarter finalist at Euros or whatever, because KCO maybe wasn't the best institution and all these things. But Darian Hutan has legit amazing speeches. His speech in the partial quarters or partial octals or however it's called in 2017 Euros, the one on China, I'd really recommend people watch it. It's a really, really good speech. Again, this doesn't speak anything to you, but to any debate nerds in the audience, go watch that speech. It's a good speech. There's also John Papantui in that debate, who's also very good. And I love John Papantui. He's another very underrated past speaker that not a lot of people talk about.
I mean, we've kind of
He did.
naturally shifted to the discussion of like overrated and underrated speakers, so might as well do it now. You've already kind of mentioned two underrated speakers. Give us a few more underrated speakers, and let's start off the hot take
So
session.
So underrated. Let's do firstly all time underrated, then current underrated. All time underrated. I think firstly, people tell me he's not underrated because people like him a lot, but I don't think people like him enough. Jack Sinut is a very underrated speaker. Jack Sinut was arguably at a point the best speaker in the world. I think he had a decent argument for it. He just never did the worlds to sort of prove it. I've based a lot of my style on how Jack Sinut speaks, and I think Jack Sinut is probably very, very underrated. Um, Another underrated all-time speaker, and people here will call me biased. I think Rumen is also underrated, which is weird because Rumen was world finalist, but still everyone spits on him and shits on him, and they don't give him a single rep call in any round, right? I think that the underrated aspect of this is that Rumen, I think, was actually the best speaker in the world. And I think Rumen has a argument, which I would agree with, to be the speaker of sort of your guys' generation. I mean, I like you also very much, Nikki, but you know that subjectively your style is not what appeals to me as a judge, and this is fine, of course. Rumen's style is what appeals to me, and I think Rumen is probably, he was the best speaker. So the way I measure who was the best speaker in the world is from one world to the next, only counting the second world. So from Belgrade to Madrid, only counting Madrid, I think Rumen was the best speaker in the world. I think he was better than Kadar. I think he was better than Matt Cato. I think he was better than whoever else you want to make the argument for. I think he was better than you. I'm very, very sorry. This is a, how do you say, subjective thing. So I think Rumen is also very underrated. Um, a lot of other very underrated speakers, people like Tom Manor, also
Just,
very
so,
underrated.
sorry, what?
Yeah,
Obviously, because with Jack, you gave some context for it. Could you like elaborate on why what about Roman speaking is underrated, if that makes sense?
because he's not considered better than a lot of the people I think he was better than. I don't think many people would say that Rumen was better than Hadar, but I think Rumen was better than Hadar. I would be very comfortable in that sort of selection. I think he was better than everyone of that sort of time frame. And again, he does not get his due. Like you guys broke first, you made finals, and still no one cares about you. You go to Vienna Ivy, you break on straights and all of these things. So clearly, not enough rep to go about there. I think, how do you say, there should be more.
Yeah, you're welcome to continue with the hot takes. I'm all ears.
Yeah, like there's some other, like, how do you say, throwaway underrated speakers, like Tom Manor, very underrated. Israeli Selveliev, very underrated all time, super underrated. Selveliev was probably top 10 best speaker of all time. Tek Wei Tan is the most underrated all time speaker. I decided this. A lot of people don't consider Tekwe as like one of the 10 best speakers of all time. Tekwe is to me one of the five best speakers of all time. And depends on when you ask me, he's not fifth, right? Like he can be higher than this and stuff like this. He just never had the big major success outside of that one Euros final. So I think a lot of people underrate him. But I think he's one of the best, like best first speakers to ever do it. I think he's very underrated. In terms of underrated speakers now, hmm, who is underrated now? Uh, I can tell you underrated people going into tournaments, underrated like teams and stuff like this, because it's a bit harder to gauge how someone is rated currently. I think Belgrade are very underrated going into Vietnam Worlds. I think Belgrade are routinely underrated by everyone whenever they go into any major. Like Ilya and Jorde are, I think, maybe the best team at Vietnam Worlds, and I think they don't get that sort of treatment and stuff like this. So they're not clearly the best team, but I think they have a very good argument for it. Um, I think that there are also some speakers that are very consistently underrated. Uh, he's my buddy, so I'm biased here, but I think Aniket is very underrated from Oxford. I think Aniket never got the credit in his team when he was with Zarina, but he's very good, and I think he has a lot of sort of opportunities to do this. I think, okay, this is the other hot take. Let's go into the hot takes where I offend people, which is underrated. Every single partner of Naomi's is always underrated. Maybe this sounds very bad, but um, it's the way that those teams are structured always predisposes that Naomi Speaker becomes underrated. Like people treated Max Rosen as if he was a 77 average speaker, as if he couldn't do anything without that team. But like Max Rosen was good. He wasn't a perfect debater by any means, but he was good. And I think that he did a lot of things very well. He was stylistically very good, sold a lot of things. He was quite good at weighing. But simply the fact that he's sort of in the orbit of Naomi in particular makes him sort of always made him underrated. And this is true for all of the subsequent and previous partners that Naomi has ever had. I don't know why. I just always think about this when I think underrated. Something about being in a team with her just makes you underrated. I remember when I spoke with her, we had like a 10-point difference or something like this. She was outspeaking me 2 to 3 points every round. I averaged like a 76 at that tournament.
Yeah, I think to be honest, like because I've also like spoken with Naomi, and he had like a huge average discretion, which I think a part of it has to do with the fact that what we already said of like spammers and the better strategy in debating. Let's call it like that. But it's just
Yeah,
that like in these particular cases, you have like the two, let's say, conflicting ways to go about the game in one particular team. And so Naomi would go out and spam a lot, which is her strategy, obviously, has worked very well for her. And then you would go out, or me would go out, and go about winning the round in our own way, which probably doesn't necessarily work together so much. And if Naomi wins by that first speech, the second speech might look kind of weird in the context of the round and what it actually did. I think that might be a part of it, but I don't know. Like I think that's kind of like everybody that achieves a lot of success in debating and has like a lot of people saying they're a great debater and all-time debater, like their partner is gonna suffer through that. to a certain extent. Um, same could be said about you, for example, being underrated when you spoke with Rumen as well, not only me.
I
So
was
that
not.
kind of well, not in your eyes. I was talking about other people, uh, but the more interesting part with the hot takes, most overrated debaters.
Yeah, so there are obviously many, many overrated speakers. Many. Like, who is all time overrated? Let's start there because that's easy. I think a great example is people who make people who make good speeches but have bad cases. Like, guys, I know everyone loves Vinu Goswami of Hard House A, North American icon. He made very good speeches. Those, like Vinu and Joe McGrade, had batshit crazy cases like 40% of the time if you look at their rounds. And people are like, but Joe McGrade was very bad. This is why Vinu Guzmani was so good. But he proved the cases. He made the cases and all these things. So how can you say someone who was like a good rebuttaler and stuff? He made like good speeches where he rebutted a lot. Is this great speaker if the cases were bad themselves? I think this is an example where people tend to get overrated all time. But this is boring. Let's talk about who is overrated now. This is the sort of important discussion. And obviously, right now, there are many, many overrated speakers. So let's divide them into categories in order to make the organization of this type of thing easier. So the first category of overrated speakers is people who speak in a way. So, like, okay, how is overratedness formed? Let's talk about this beforehand. Overratedness is there needs to be a difference between reality and the conception. And usually these differences are biggest in two cases I found. The first is when the stupid debate NPC, that's maybe not so good and stuff like this, is super impressed by you and thinks you are the Lord Jesus Christ reincarnate and walking the earth again. Like these people don't have a big voice in debating, but there are numerically many, many of them. Ergo, if they think you are the greatest of all time, then you're the greatest of all time, even if you're not that good. So, who appeals to the stupid NPC very, very much? The second way the debate that overratedness is formed, very much, which I found, is old dinos who don't know anything about current debating, saying their opinions, and therefore forming this type of thing. Like, okay, this is maybe a hot take, maybe people who aren't very involved in the society and who've seen like four speeches out of each of the speakers they're talking about should not have a big voice in who is considered good or bad or any of these things. Like a very, very interesting thing. At the how do you say at the Black Sea UDC social, I was drinking, having fun because I had just €1, and you know what happened? Milush comes up to me and he tells me, "Do you know what your greatest strength always was, Alec, and at this tournament as well? That you rebut very, very well. All of these other teams are just weighing, but you're actually rebutting." And that's not what I do at all. Anyone who's seen three of my speeches could tell you that half of my speeches are weighing. And then I remember, oh my God, this guy hasn't seen any of my speeches in like 2 years, but he has a voice on saying whether I am a good debater or a bad debater and stuff like this. So often, the speaker who appeals to either stupid debate NPCs or to fucking out of touch dinos is the one who is overrated. So who then are these people? Firstly, the people who speak in a style to appeal to stupid debate NPCs. Um, Here's what I'll say: spammers generally appeal to people who are not as good at debating. People who are not as good at debating see people running a lot of things and they're like, yeah, on vibes, it seems like they win. So they give them the first and they think they're really, really great. I don't know how this works. The monkey brain is numerical, not quantitative, perhaps. I am uncertain in this sort of process, but what I know is that it definitely does happen. I remember Naomi on your podcast was saying, no, it's actually the opposite. You know, bad judges hate spammers because, how do you say, they forget everything spammers run. This is pure copium. all spammers tend to become very overrated by bad judges. People like Naomi, like Matt Cato, like Tejas, even like other spammers, like ESL spammers, like Anna Common a little bit, but to a much lesser extent. Teen, of course. Uh, a lot of these spammers tend to get slightly overrated when because the MPC just sees them running a lot of things. It's like therefore it must be good and all these things. The second category of people that tend to get overrated is old speakers that stick around for a long time. This is a very easy one. Almost every old speaker that is currently speaking, that has spoken for like many years, is probably not as good as you think. Maybe, just maybe, team in a pro-am is not the greatest team of all time that can destroy every single current debater and all of these things. Maybe, just maybe, he's a little bit overrated because people know his name and he stuck around a lot and this kind of rep is compounded. There's also a different factor in this, which perhaps I'll talk about later, which is that speakers tend to become worse over time, in my opinion. So actually, the overratedness becomes bigger because people expect them to become better the more they do it. Like if Tim does it for 6 years, he'll become the greatest speaker in the history of debating. He'll drop 89s every round. That's not how that works. He probably becomes worse, and even if he doesn't, he was probably overrated in the first place. The third category, and this is the most sort of, how do you call it, difficult to catch. I found that the things that forms overratedness the most are narratives. And what does this mean? What do I mean by narratives? Like, I'll give a great example here. uh, Tejas, a lot of people don't know this, but you know Johns Hopkins, where Tejas spoke and dropped an 88 and everyone cared about this. You remember that?
Yeah, I think I remember like vaguely about that tournament. Although in my radar it wasn't really that special.
I don't think you were debating at the time, so it wasn't a very big thing, but it was a big thing. Everyone talked about it. It's what formed Tejas as a very good speaker. What a lot of people don't know is that Tejas also spoke like some tournaments before that as well, most notably the Yale IV or whatever, with like a Yijuhan, who is like a good speaker. Tejas was the 30th best speaker at that tournament, and he dropped in like the quarterfinals or something. But then Tejas does, how do you say, the Johns Hopkins Open or whatever. And he drops an 88. And all of a sudden, look at what the narrative becomes. This is a person who has never done BP before. He's just coming in from world schools, although that is not true. He's so promising, such a great prospect. He dropped an 88. He's the future of debating. Now Tejas cannot average below an 84. This guy can get up, he can make animal noises, and the judge will be like, very good speech, 82. Worst case scenario for him in this sort of way, right? And mind you, I think Tejas is one of the best speakers of all time, and I still think he's colossally overrated in this sort of way. One of the best speakers in the world currently. So then what happens very often is these narratives persist even when reality tells you otherwise. Another great example of this. So Naomi had the narrative of her, which was like, she's coming in and she Iron Man and top spoke the whatever USUDC or NAUDC or whatever the fuck, I don't care, some American major or whatever major. Uh, and how do you say? Uh, this narrative has maintained itself even when reality has begun to be against it. A great example of this. I recently found out that many people believe that Naomi is better than Matt Cato, which is to me an undefensible debating take. Like objective reality contradicts this and stuff like this. On the simplest level of eye test, you can see that this is not true. But even if you couldn't use the eye test to determine who is better and who isn't, one of them has done better than the other at two straight worlds and also does better than it consistently the majority of majors they do all of these things like quite substantially better than the other. But look, the narrative is greater than reality. The conception of Naomi is better exists because of a narrative, not because of anything that happens in the sort of real world. So even if the real world contradicts this, people still opt for the narrative because debating is fundamentally a sport where you can't see every speech, you can't watch every tournament or stock every tab. So you opt in for what already exists as these kinds of narratives. So often forming narratives early is very, very important to people being overrated and stuff like this. So I think these are broad categories. So in the end, who is the most overrated speaker in the world? Probably Tejas. Who is the second most overrated speaker in the world? Probably Naomi. This is the long answer. This is the long explanation to the short answer.
Interesting. Like, I mean, I don't know. In terms of CV, Naomi and Matt are actually pretty close. If you look at it just objectively, like one has won Cambridge, the other has won Oxford. Um, you have World Quarter and World Semis versus World Semis and uh, World Octus in that particular category. Matt has been best speaker of the world. Naomi was second in that year that she made the semifinals. So I mean, I think also like Naomi has best spoke Oxford and Cambridge, for example, as compared to Matt. So like I actually agree that in my subjective opinion, Matt is better, but I think it's on paper, it's actually pretty close. Like I don't agree with the argument on this particular comparison. I think both are overrated in their own types of ways, especially because of my subjective opinion on the strategy that they employ in debating. But in terms
Oh
of the
no, yeah,
CV
Matt is
element,
also overrated.
yeah, but in terms of the CV element, I had to call you out on this because I do think that like if you put it like that, it's very hard to deny Naomi the fact that like I guess from the NPC debater's point of view, if you see these achievements, you're like she has to be one of the best. So it is what it is.
Yeah,
That's how it works. Like I've only been the sixth best speaker in the world, similar to yourself, I think. So
maybe one
uh,
day.
maybe one day it will be different. Um, I wanna like this hot take session is quite interesting. Um, so here is one specific question that was kind of brought to my attention, but I have to say I haven't actually researched it quite well. But allegedly, there's been a beef between you and Matt Maurelio about high impact arguments. So tell us a little
High
bit more
burden,
about
high
that
burden.
high burden arguments. So tell us a little bit more on that. Like, give us the context because me and also the audience probably is not so much into the context of this particular big beef.
It's not a beef. That's what I want to say. It's just a funny thing. So so there was a doom thread in debating serious posting started by Rumen, where I very much supported Rumen, even if Rumen was an idiot about it, and he led that discussion very badly. Where he, how do you say, said that we shouldn't buy, arguments that are like, insane, and there are great examples of arguments that are insane that are being bought and stuff like this. And in this doom thread, the Rumen and I shat on a lot of speeches made by a lot of people saying that they were, how do you say, that they had just the rep call given to them and all these things, and they actually should have been for and all of this, that they were running crazy arguments. So then what happens is I judged some tournament. I don't remember which tournament. And I get Matt Muriello with, I don't remember who even was in Matt Muriello's team. Jeremiah, maybe, but I could be wrong. Anywho, they are closing the tournament. I'm not going to say what they ran because I think it would be, how do you say, mean if I said what they ran, which already sets up, what is, how do you say, what is about to happen in a certain
I
way.
mean, come on. You have to tell us what they are on, so we can like
No. Okay. So on.
try to be objective about it and give us like the general context of what
Okay.
they aimed to do.
So on the motion, this house believes that it's better for Turkey for Erdogan to stay in power or whatever. They ran a series of arguments, like 3 or 4 arguments, which were, if Erdogan falls, there will be a mass, how do you say, oppression of Muslim people within Turkey. Erdogan is great friends with Saudi Arabia. If he falls, now Turkey will be very bad against Saudi Arabia. This was the analysis. I did not understand why he was great friends with them. And I don't even remember what the other stuff was. But it was arguments that were said that were not necessarily explained. It happens to everyone. And they weren't maybe the sanest arguments to run, like the most, how do you say? And what I said in feedback then was, these are high burden arguments, which are not necessarily proven. These require to prove different burdens, which this team did not meet. Ergo, this team is fourth. So then Matt Moriello goes on the NA Spar podcast and says, judges will just give you the fourth and just say you have high burden arguments and all of these things. If you try to run anything interesting and all of this. Okay. To Matt Moriello and to all other debaters who find themselves in this situation, high burden means crazy. Do not run high burden arguments, because high burden arguments are crazy. The problem is that your argument looked crazy in this sort of way. It's very difficult to win with a crazy looking argument. So it's not the issue that judges are unfairly imposing standards and all of this. The issue is that you're running crazy arguments in this sort of way and then asking me to just buy them as if they're just any other argument and all this. No, no. It's very simple. You say it in other podcasts. Ayal Kayutman has said it. If an argument has a big impact, it must be hard to prove. If an argument has a small impact, it mustn't be easy to prove, but it's probably easier to prove. Debating would be broken if everyone could just easily prove, how do you say, crazy arguments with very, very high burdens on this thing.
Okay,
If you're
okay,
going
but
to run something,
I just have a sorry to interrupt. I just want to clear something up. When you say crazy argument, do you mean high impact argument, or do you mean like an argument that just is totally implausible? Because these two things are
do you
different.
know Do you know what the craziest thing is? And you can run an argument in a way that it seems like a high impact but proven argument, and in a way that it seems totally implausible. Totally implausible isn't necessarily an inherent thing to an argument. But if you're running a high impact argument in a lazy way, odds are it will look completely insane. The way I said it makes his argument sound insane. You could probably make those arguments, but the way he made them sound fucking crazy, dude. So
But
this is a
Alec,
message. If you are going to run high impact arguments, make sure that you're proving all of these types of things, all the little steps and everything. Because
who
otherwise, I'm sorry, it looks crazy.
so I understand that, but who decides what is crazy? Who decides what's totally plausible or implausible? Because I think one of the problems that people had with the way that Rumen presented this opinion, which I actually kind of agree with the underlining opinion. I just think that Rumen has zero diplomacy bone in his body. It's like his kryptonite is being diplomatic and trying to uh, factor in different opinions when he really believes something. But uh, who gets to decide what's really high impact and what's not? And this is like also Tin's argument, right? Which is like, to you something might sound crazy, but to another person it might not sound crazy. It might sound very plausible. And I think, like, to be fair, like, I want to draw the difference because in reality, we also have this kind of check. Let's say conspiracy theories. To some people, they are totally plausible. To other people, they're not. They're like totally crazy. There is there is no way that this is
Yeah.
true. And sometimes in real life, conspiracy theories also become true. So like the line in reality is very blurred already. So how do we set it in debating
Yeah.
is what I'm trying to say.
So a little arithmetic, right? A little basic math up in here. They run 3 or 4 arguments. Let's be generous and call it 2 minutes per argument, not counting POIs and all of this stuff. They're weighing against their top half or whatever. And I'm giving a very specific example here, but this is almost always what happens is our impact is bigger. This is much, much worse than whatever they're talking about. It affects far more people like this. There is obviously a degree of subjectivity to debating, of course. But I think a majority of judges would not be persuaded, or majority of good judges would not be persuaded by 2 minutes spent on an argument that you later weigh as being the most important thing in a debate. No, no, no. If you're probably proving that something has a massive, much greater impact, then it's probably not as easy to prove it as just 2 minutes and stuff like this. And this is the problem that people do. I don't think there's anything inherently unbuyable. Of course I don't. I mean, I'm not a Rumen. Again, I said this. Rumen is a dum-dum when it comes to this sort of discussion. What I think is people are lazy and they assume that I need to just buy their arguments because they, how do you say, gave one reason why something could potentially happen, and now World War III will occur, or two planets will collide and everything will go crazy because of this one motion or whatever. They have the biggest impact, they must win. No, no. If you're proving the biggest impact, then odds are that you need to do extra work. That you need to not just say give one reason why this might happen, but give several, or go against any basic presumptions. Otherwise, this is lazy debating. Why would you ever go about proving a low impact argument if all arguments were theoretically equally easy to prove? So this is my
Okay,
take.
yeah, no, I actually agree, but I have to be honest, you're kind of taking the low hanging fruit here. I think most people would agree that if you don't analyze enough a high impact argument, it shouldn't be credited uh, as much. But I think what the argument that, for example, Tin makes is if I pick a high impact argument, but I actually analyze it a lot and I give a bunch of reasons for it and how it might happen. But people like Rumen, and this is why Naomi is like joking, like Rumen is the worst judge in the world, blah blah, would take that argument. And I'm like, again, I'm not necessarily saying this shouldn't be done, but it's important to have the discussion. You have a high impact argument that is analyzed a lot. Whether it's well analyzed or not is kind of dependent on whether you believe that the argument itself is plausible. Then what do you do then? If you have something that you would classify as pure crazy, but Tim Pulich, best speaker of the world, stands up and for 7 minutes give 10 reasons as to why this will happen. How do you go about this? Where like, let's say the other team stands up and says this just cannot be, this is impossible for to happen, is very very unlikely. Like how do you judge these particular situations where mathematically speaking, as you say, one has much more analysis than the other? It's kind of hard to come up with 10 rebuttals to something that is just implausible, or at least you think it's implausible. So do you
Yeah.
just to formulate the question, because I'm thinking about this on the spot, do you go about it purely mathematically and say these are the 10 things that Tin said, you have to rebut each one of those? Or is there a certain plausibility metric, and how do you determine it?
So firstly, Rumen is a bad judge. This much is inarguable, and he would never buy an argument he thinks is crazy. That is because he is a bad judge, right? This is fine. This we agree upon. Okay, what is then my take? My take isn't if you spend X amount of minutes on this, then it must work. If you don't spend X amount of minutes on this, it shouldn't work. What I think is the thing is the judges should wonder what burdens need to be proven in order for for me to buy an argument at the minimum level and stuff like this. What do I need to? Which burdens do I need to see met in order to buy this? Which is, I think, where the problem is. I don't think judges do this, and I think this often solves problems like this because often mathematically a case will be proven 10 reasons given across 7 minutes, but they will only say meet a burden. But there are other burdens necessary to buy this argument. What Tim says here is, but this is just adding extra burdens. It's unfair and all of these things. But I don't agree. I think a judge should have a reasonable conception of what the burdens that need to be met are in order to buy an argument. Otherwise, why couldn't we theoretically prove anything? Why couldn't we prove World War III or any of this if we spent 7 minutes doing it? At the end, it always comes down to the intuition of the judge. I think there is a way to systematize it to minimize the judge's bias. This is what I'm thinking. It won't. It's not perfect, sure, but it's better than if just any argument could be proven equally easily and stuff like this. Like this is what I think is much more problematic because then this limits the tactics in debate, right? Why run low impact arguments if high impact arguments are all you will ever need? So, sure, it's not the perfect way of deciding it, but it's a pretty decent way of deciding it and stuff like this. So I think this whole every judge will be super biased in intervention is probably not. No, I think there is a way to do it where not every judge will be super biased in interventionist.
I very much agree with that, and I think like the opinion that I've expressed personally goes into this in terms of there are multiple different, uh, let's say, safety mechanisms to prevent bias judging already on multiple levels. We have TA teams looking for it. We have feedback. We have recordings of debate. We have multiple things. We have equity, obviously, in these particular cases. And we have like general narratives of like, I think debaters overall believe that, at least in principle, we should be giving kind of opportunity for different types of ideas to be explored in debating. I think debaters are that type of people, even though sometimes this is, um, how would you say, ironic or hypocritical towards certain types of ideas. But it's definitely in general happening. So I think this is exactly what I wanted to get into. It's not so much of like when people like Rumen or you talk about like these crazy cases, it doesn't come actually from a place of like I'm mad at these debaters or like I have my biased opinion on these particular things, but from the perspective of thinking about the game and how the game should work and what's good and healthy for the game, because these things are important. Like if you use the analogy for let's say sports again, like there are some things in sports that you don't change as rules because it might break the game. So like for example in basketball there is a debate of like whether we should put a 4 point line and what it will do to the sport. There is even like a debate about like whether the 3 point line is good as it is right now. And I think similarly to this is the same. It's not that we want to limit people, but if we allow them too much, then what debating becomes overall is important. And like I think also like team and people like team come from a place of like I want to run innovating different things, different arguments that probably haven't been heard before. Fair enough, but this also like then like completely transforms the game. And it also has the problem of like deriving debating from reality, which on its own, like I think I already talked with Helena about this from a different perspective of like equity perspective and how we deal with these things in the community. But it is a fact of life that you also want to keep a lot of these ideas grounded, especially like some of these debates where, like, if we talk about what's like international relations, what's going to happen in Turkey or whatever, you want to keep these things grounded, I believe, because this is
Uh,
kind of like the connection between the real world and what we do.
I just want to say two things. The first is I 100% agree with everything you said. This is not Rumen's take, however. And I'm not telling this to you, I'm telling this to every single person out there. You will not be able to convince Rumen of something he disagrees with if you just do it very well and meet all your burdens. So don't get baited. We do not represent Rumen here. His take is much worse and much crazier. And secondly, the whole running innovative arguments, I completely agree with. But I think that there is a way to do it right. And I say this as a person who runs shit tons of innovative argument. We won Euros running that suffering is good, right? Like we don't always, Velina and I just go for what is easy to prove and all of these things. Let's break the deadlock. Although I did say let's break the deadlock in Euros final, which is very terrible. But generally, I think that there is a way to do it where you can still innovate but not just do whatever the fuck you want. This is what I'll say.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. Let's take like 2 minute break. Kind of go to the bathroom, chillax, and I have a few more questions that we can get to. You can think some hot takes. Тук Велина ще го кътне това. I wanted to deep dive on obviously kind of more of like your actual debating career, except from the like the different hot takes. I think something that a lot of people like novices or people that are kind of right now becoming better, gaining more experience, have been asking me, and so it came to me that it's probably a good, like a bit boring but kind of relevant debate question that a lot of people would probably want to know. Uh, because I feel like a lot of debaters who are on the rise and are trying to prepare for big competitions or whatever, uh, they they think that successful debaters have figured out some secret truth behind everything, and there is one specific solution that if they only did it, everything would change. Um, so, what's the best debating advice you have received?
The best the best debating advice I received was from Milos, who once again I've named many times, both in a positive and in a negative light throughout this thing, where he told me and that the best thing I can do is to listen to people who I think are worse than me. Everyone wants to be like Harish. Everyone wants to be like MDG. That's where everyone looks for the things they take. But there is plenty of debating to learn from people who aren't Harish, who aren't MDG. Like, they don't do everything well, sure, but they do particular things well. Things you can adapt, things you can do, all of this. Like, again, Jack Sinnott is not one of the best speakers of all time, almost certainly not. But Jack Sinnott is who I based my style on the most because I was like, damn, this is like a very good style of debating that if I could use, I could make a lot of this. I'm not saying that I thought I was better than Jack Sinnott, but there are also other speakers who you could take things from that aren't like necessarily the top end. The people who I'm better at. Like an example, I remember in this Euros prep season, we looked a lot at the way Zagreb A debates certain motions, Robbie and Paula. I think we were better than Zagreb, but I think we could still learn a lot from individual ways that they did this type of thing. So, like, expand your worldview when it comes to who you're listening to. This is what like all the sort of a lot of shit debaters do. Not shit, but a lot of like debaters who want to win something but never get to win it. They're just like, let me ask Milos for advice. Let me ask Harish for advice. No, no. Ask people outside of this and stuff like this. This is the advice. I mean, ask them, these good guys as well, but expand your horizons.
Fair enough. And on that train of thought, was like obviously again like this is very simplified question. It's not necessarily the reality of prepping for a debate competition, but if you had to name a single uh, resource or like type of training that you did that helped you the most, what would it be?
So I guess the most obvious example is we sparred before Euros for like 4 months, multiple times a week, every week. We organize the spars ourselves because otherwise, no, you can't rely on nobody and nothing. And a very crucial thing about our sparring, which is a bit more interesting than our sparring, is we only did opening government for months on end. We exclusively did opening government. And it wasn't because it was our weakest position, though it was our weakest position. It's because opening government perfectly trains you for how to be a good debater quickly, because opening government is in many ways the most disadvantaged position. In some ways not, but in many ways it is. So you need to have an understanding of what the debate will be from the very start if you want to be opening government. So to train just this actually gives you a lot of the skills necessary that you would need for all other positions as well. This worked for us. I don't know if it would work for everyone, but I think on the whole it's a good thing to um, do something repetitive over and over and over again. In our case, it was sparring OG, hundreds of OGs. I want to kill myself when I think about it now. But we sort of did this type of thing a lot, and it ended up working good enough, I'd say.
Funnily enough, you lost ESL finals from OG, and you
Yes,
won
I know, I know.
Euros
Fuck
from
you.
CR. So no, but I would agree with this advice. I think this is the right way of thinking about it, with the caveat that once you progress, one of the things that actually uh, shows you that you have progressed is that you have a better and more detailed idea of the things that you should work on. And when that happens, obviously, like you should take that into account. There are just some teams that are much better, like even naturally, you could say it from OG than from CG, from closing. And these teams should also be like thinking about that. So in a vacuum, I would say OG is a good advice. I would also say OG is a very good advice for more novice to intermediate speakers. I think at that point, then, like from your perspective, you just have to kind of think about what do you need to do specifically for your team. And for your case, that was OG. So fair enough. I think like again, I've I want to highlight these particular things because it's a question that I would probably never ask you, me myself as Nikki, but I've realized to talking with people that it's actually something important to uh, showcase how you go about the philosophy of prepping, and also like maybe just pitch ideas that you might take off. And I think this is the best way to do it. Like just listen to different people and how they particularly did it. Because like me and Rumen before Madrid Worlds, we did like 3 spars or whatever in 3 months. We're like literally the laziest debaters ever, probably. But it is what it is. Like we are just spars at that point didn't work for us. But it's also a fact that like if you take into account all the spars that we have accumulatively done individually and as a team, will probably be up there. much higher in the like all time statistics of, hey, how many spars did you do and stuff like that. So fair enough. Moving on to your debate journey. I don't care about the old days in Bulgaria. That has kind of become quite boring from my perspective. So it's like I want to go about it with like highlight. Um, Starting like interesting fact, you've done worlds more times than me as a speaker, at least. Which which if you say it from that perspective sounds very weird. But like, what's your highlight from the first worlds you did? Like, especially looking back into it, what did you learn the most, or what was like a really fun
Nothing.
moment?
I completely have forgotten the first worlds I did. I did it with Bisser. I don't know why we did it. We were not prepping at all. It was like my sixth international tournament ever. Uh, we broke ESL, but like it's not hard to break ESL at Worlds. I'm sorry to diminish everyone who has broken ESL at Worlds. And I think the only highlight is on the fucking Russia round about Russia in Antarctica. We ran that it would be very expensive to go to Antarctica as Russia because your people would freeze. And what the fuck was his name? The squarehead Australian Conor O'Brien, was that what he was called? I think so. Conor O'Brien gave us a pair of 84s for running that the Russian will freeze to death in Antarctica. It's very bad. Other than this, I literally remember nothing. I don't think we learned anything. I don't think we progressed at all as debaters. We're just kind of there and we did something.
That's the most unhealthy way of like feedback that I've heard from a successful debater so far. Great for you that you had zero takes. I obviously don't believe you, but let's leave it at that. Like, I guess you have more time to reflect on these particular worlds, and I'm sure you did learn quite a lot of stuff, even if it was how not to debate. Next one was Belgrade, and here it's a little bit interesting. So, like, obviously, like we've heard it from Rumen's perspective, but uh, what were your first thoughts when Rumen asked you to speak? Did he out of the blue ask you? Have you ever talked about it? What's the story behind that? And what was your feeling about it? Did you think of like, oh, if I speak with Rumen, we're gonna destroy them? This is what I needed, or were you like skeptic about it? Tell us more of how that came to be.
So you had so you muted yourself. You had retired. Nikki had done the classic retirement where he had retired, and Rumen was like, dude, let's speak now. And I was like, okay, why not? Again, at that point, I was doing worlds very nonchalantly. I just decided, why not? I should do it. It sounds like a good idea. Um, we went to our first tournament, Trinity IV or something, and we broke like fourth, and we reached the finals, and we almost won the finals against Naomi and XK. And we were like, okay, we'll win Worlds, easy money. It is ours. Why are we even wasting time? This is they might as well give it to us. We then proceeded to not make a single final in any other of the prep tournaments we did. We fucking I remember one time we lost to Chris Mentis and Ivan Imperial Way, who were running literally like one. They beat us off one line where they said something, and the judge was like, "Yeah, this is a very good line," and they gave it to us. And we wanted to quit. We were like, there's no point. We'll never win worlds and all of these things. We won't even break. Why are we even doing this? Why are we wasting our times? Uh, then the truth ended up somewhere in between. First 6 rounds, we win top room round six. We become the top team in the world at the time, right? Then we become cocky, very cocky. Round four, third. Round seven, third. Round eight, third. Round nine, fourth, where we had a pair of 76s in a world's bubble room. And so we end up breaking very low. And this is what we learned. from, how do you say, from this type of worlds. We learned to humble ourselves before the Lord. We went to the church. We did this. We looked at this. How do you call it? In Orthodox churches, we have like drawings on the ceiling. We looked at the saints and we decided how we need to do these types of things. And then we went, humbled ourselves, one partial octos, one quarters, one octos, one quarters, and then it came to semis. Now, did we lose semis because of Rumen? The short answer is yes. Essentially, what happened was, how do you say? We got some motion about religion or whatever the fuck, I don't even know about. And we were closing opposition, and we had to. Basically, it was defending religion that is like much more spiritual and much less organized. Our conception of a spiritual, non-organized religion was Orthodox Christianity. Apparently the debate was about like Buddhism or whatever the fuck, like Hinduism and shit. And like the only religion we could think of is our own Orthodox Christianity and all these things. And I recommended to Rumen a case, which would have won us the debate. And Rumen was like, "No, this is the stupidest case I've ever seen." And he just read something about like your mom or whatever. I don't even remember what it was about and all these things. Uh, and I got up and I thought I did a pretty good whip speech. I think I outspoke Rumen in that round. But we were lost. No, we were not close to going through. I still firmly believe that had we gone through to the final, we would have won. I think on the dollar motion, maybe we would not have because all were very good, Sajid and Surdip. But I think we would have had a very good chance. But how do you say? Rumen sold in this sort of way. My man got up and he did not cook as the kids say nowadays. So this is in the end what happened in Belgrade World. There was some other stuff as well, but this is the important bits.
I understand. So your core takeaway from Belgrade Worlds is humble pill yourself, and then you proceed to explain how if only Roman would have listened to you and your much smarter case, you would have won World. I think this
But I am
perfectly
humble. I am humble.
this perfectly encapsulates your character. I love it. I love it. No, nothing to add. Nothing to add. Just one thing because I think you didn't like particularly answer that question. Like, what was the you gave us the full breakdown of what happened. Fair enough. I think it's a great story. Um, but what was your first reaction? What did you personally think before anything happened? Did you think you would do very good? Were you cocky about it, or like what was your initial perception of you and Rumen as a team when he
Rumen
first?
and I have always been Yeah, so Rumen and I have always been very good friends. For since I'm a small child, Rumen has always been the big brother in debating and stuff to me. Um, but what I quickly realized, and what I think I sort of knew at the same time, is that Rumen and I are terrible personalities to be in a team together. We are, how do you say, we are a vortex of sort of, how do you call it, hatred and vitriol towards everyone else. So we often build upon, the highest highs that, we were winning, everything was happening. And this was my very first conversations with him. We were talking about this, or the lowest lows, that we were nothing, and all these things, that we would get wrecked and all of these types of things. So a lot of the conversations were entirely dependent on how we did that weekend. If we did badly, we are the worst speakers of all time. If we did well, again, they might as well give it to us right now. Why are we wasting our time? But considering that we did well only one time, the vast majority of the time, it was pretty bad.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Uh, um, like I'm muted, but I'm laughing quite hard from that particular end for sure. The vortex of hatred. Uh, that
Yes.
might become the thumbnail. We would see. Uh,
Okay. I
um,
told Rumen that I was going to be doing this podcast, and Rumen told me, you need to hate as much as you can to upkeep our sort of personality.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So what happened after Worlds? Were you like obviously you went through a particular like there's definitely some sadness about it, but it's still like World semifinals. It's quite the achievement. So tell me about like the story of like going from that to like actually deciding to debate with your girlfriend and still trying to achieve like the highest of goals, which is to win the next major. In this case, the next Worlds and Euros.
I think when we first started going out, she floated the idea we should speak together sometime, and I told her absolutely not. This will never ever happen. I will die before we ever do a tournament together. But at some point, my mind changed, and we decided to do it. I don't know why. If you can't tell about me, I very much lack in intentionality why I do things. I just kind of do debating stuff. And we decided, okay, let's do Madrid. And the only reason I think we decided this was because everyone else was also doing Madrid. Because you were doing Madrid and Maria and Vista were also doing Madrid. And yeah, I might as well do Madrid as well. I came into that World's prep season the cockiest person you can imagine. I mean, man, come on. I was a world semifinalist. We were going to be like number one and number five best speaker had we not gotten 76s in the last rounds. I was the shit at the time. I very quickly realized I was not the shit. In fact, I was very, very far from the shit. The reason I was not the shit was twofold. The first is for some reason I don't know. I think you told me to do it. I spoke first in our lineup with Velina and I, which is probably the worst debating decision I've ever done. I am a terrible, terrible first speaker. I cannot prove arguments. My speeches are much more art than science. So I definitely could not sort of do these types of things so much. Um, and the second reason I was not the shit is because I was apparently way worse than I thought I was. Rumen was apparently much better than me, which never seemed to be the case when we were speaking together, because we were kind of close enough in the speaker tab and all these things, and we were always helping each other in the prep. No. I was dog shit. Holy fuck. I was extremely surprised by this because I, as even as a second speaker, I could only ever really do one thing. I could just rebut. That was the only thing I ever did. I just rebutted a lot. I sat down, I rebutted everybody. And it worked because Rumen was a very, very good case builder. So often we had good cases and we rebutted them. Turns out I couldn't do any of the other things important to debating. I couldn't weigh. I didn't have the best positioning or anything like this. I wasn't the most constructive second speaker. And then when I now had to be the sort of lead of a team, because Velina still hadn't had the most experience in international teams, I was really, really bad. Like really bad. Like I think we made final of Belgrade Open, which granted was a pretty big achievement because Belgrade Open was a pretty stacked comp. I believe you didn't even break, and Rumen gave a 5 minute speech, but we made final and we were great. Then we made nothing. We didn't break at a lot of other tournaments. Wherever we broke, we lost first out round. We always broke low, and we just decided, okay, this is fine. Let's just keep going. This is a piece of advice to everyone. If you are not breaking where you want to, change something. Just keeping going will not get you where you want to be. You need to adjust something in yourself. We adjusted nothing in ourselves because I thought I was very good and I was also very lazy at the time. So we did poorly. That we even broke open at Madrid is, I think, an impressive achievement and not an impressive achievement. It's like an unlikely thing that could have happened because we were bad, like really bad. Like we submarined. We needed a first in round nine to break, and we got all, and we got the first in round nine, and we broke. But like we were not good at Madrid.
Fair enough. I think it's interesting because I feel like some things in life you just have to like they have to happen in this particular way. Like I don't think it like obviously looking back into it, I don't think it was a good decision. I thought it was a good decision back then. Like I don't think like I have the authority to that you think I had. Like I'm not sure I was the original person that suggested that idea, but I definitely stand behind the fact that I did think this was the better way to go about it. And to be honest, like there were some debates, especially where Velina had very good second speeches, uh, like uh, ESL finals of Oxford. She was very good as a very good second speech, and that's why you won in that particular base. But I think. Um, Obviously the perception with your team was that you were far more experienced in that particular case, so you were gonna be kind of like leading the way in the team, and because of that it made more sense to um, for you to speak first and kind of have more control over your overall where you're going as a team. And while obviously it was the incorrect decision to make, I think actually, from looking from afar, the fact that you did that and you did it that way and you embrace completely the like I'm gonna be the leader of the team and I'm gonna do the first speeches and all of those things actually helped out you and was like a good like lesson going forward of like what type of speaker you are and specifically what type of speaker you are not, which I think in some cases is far more important to realize. And it was important for your team dynamic for a particular sense because once you've realized um, you cannot like completely lead the way, you also had to like give kind of more um, ability for Velina to grow and to take up more responsibility. That makes sense. I think because especially like Velina in this particular sense um, would probably undervalue herself in this a lot of these situations, and this is something that a first speaker cannot do. They have to be confident to a certain extent in their case in what they're trying to prove, even from like a persuasion
Yeah.
type of point. So yeah, bad decision, but I think in this case it happened for a reason, and I actually do believe
You know how this is
that.
called, Nick?
Yeah,
Coping. This is pure cope right now. This is next level copium, but it's okay. It's
I
good coping.
mean,
It's probably true.
like I don't know, bro. Like I don't think I have the quite the incentive to cope, but I just think that from my particular debate journey, it has been important. Like for example, me retiring from debating for 6 months, uh, probably like it wasn't the best decision in terms of like obviously I ended up doing it, so I lose 6 months or whatsoever, and I had some things to understand about myself. But if I didn't actually do that, I would have stick to a lot of things that I do, and would have tried to do a lot of things that I'm just not necessarily good at, and not actually focus on the things that I am good at. And for me, that particular period was important to realize how to be the best version of myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But fair enough. Uh, so leading up to Euros finally, like the story is fairly fresh, but what are like I don't think that we have to like give the full timeline here. Obviously, like you after Worlds, you change up things, you prep a lot. You've already spoke about that, but in Euros itself, was there a moment of like mentality changing, or did you think you went in with the right mentality?
Yeah. So I think for the most part, we went in with the right mentality. We were fine with whatever happens. We're just focused on doing it. Apparently, which I only found out later, people thought we were not going to do as well as we thought we were going to do. In the EUDC draft, we were what, like 7 and 10 or something like this? Like they picked 6 people ahead of me. I don't think they should have picked 6 people ahead of me, but okay, let us say whatever happens, happens. Um, then we go into Euros and we were kind of just chilling in the in rounds. Like we didn't care at all about the in rounds. We are just kind of doing stuff, going about it. We had already won the pre-UDC tournament. Some say controversially, but those people are wrong, and I dare them to say it to my face. And how do you say? Then we go in. Uh, we just do some stuff in the in rounds. We end up breaking second, which fine, right? Like we weren't particularly trying a shit ton and all these things. We do ESL quarter. It's obvious we go through. Again, some people think we're not going through. Like Milos sitting there and watching and going like, "No, you guys are definitely losing." We were not losing. Milos was being crazy there. We were obviously winning. And how do you call this? I was pretty comfortable. Then we go into the quarters. And here we're finally like, this is at the first out round. We're locked in and all these things. And we get the motion that was like, what was it? This house prefers a world where people don't have the desire for revenge or something like this. And we're closing opposition. And opening government to run what opening government normally runs. War, all these terrible things. Opening opposition runs what they normally run. Criminal justice system, their other feelings, blah, blah, blah. We're CO. We have nothing. And this is the debate where I think we've ran the thing I've been least confident in us running. We run some framing about religion and how it counterbalances with your desire for revenge. So actually, revenge does not manifest in such a terrible way, and people are, people do revenge, but it's not like the worst thing in the world. I get up, I whip it, and all of these things. Ilya, mind you, is joining us, which is the extra problematic thing because Ilya does not write. Ilya writes maybe half of the time, maybe less, and he's looking at us in his normal Ilya way, like this, not caring about anything, writing maybe a little bit half of the time. I go out and I think, okay, we're done. We're fact. We've just lost. It's okay. We were super depressed. It was terrible. We just sat there speaking to no one. People came up to us, tried to talk to us. Uh, you came up to me and you were like, oh, this is exactly what happened with us at our Euros. We thought we were going to lose as well, but then we went through. And like, that did not help me at all because I knew we were not going through. I knew it for a fact. I was 100% certain of it.
Wait. I
But then
told you another thing as well. I told you another thing as
I don't
well.
remember what you told me.
Because I watched the round. I was in the room in that round, and I told you you were actually in fact going through, and I thought you were going through.
I did not think so.
Fair enough,
I
but I
thought we
did
were
I
not
did
going
say
through.
that.
Anywho, then what happens? The interesting thing about this was we had a round after this where we didn't know what was happening. It was the ESL semis, and it was this house hopes that the future of the world is transhumanism. Opening government, Tel Aviv gets up and they do some stuff. It's fine. They're probably winning their top half. We get up, Velina does some stuff. With transhumanism, there's no depression, blah blah blah, some boring fucking cases. No one gives a shit. Then closing opposition member, Lazar, of Belgrade B, which mind you, I also did not name. I think are one of the most underrated teams currently. I would pick Belgrade B over many, many teams. Every time I listen to Belgrade B, I think they're first. Lazar from Belgrade B gets up and he says, I shit you not, to people who later know what the story is. He gets up and he says, it is true that transhumanism will reduce human suffering, but human suffering is good. And then he makes this beautiful speech about how suffering is a good thing, about how we ought to aim for suffering, all of these things. And I listen to this, and I turn to Velina and I tell her, this is the greatest case I've ever heard. Like, I was depressed. I was just kind of going through it and all of these things. But then this brought back my desire for debating. I was like, this is what it's all about. For people to run cool and interesting stuff, for them to do great things, all of these things. Fucking Mikhailo and Lazarchu, bro, Belgrade B, are the ones who brought back my desire to debate after I was ready to give up on myself, all of these types of things. And then I get up and I make like a I think it was a good whip speech, but it was definitely, I was having fun with it. I was just doing stuff. I was making jokes. I was zigzagging and all these things, rebutting where I could, weighing where I could. Definitely, doing all of these things. Uh, so in the end, what are the names? Fine. The round ends. Then we get out, and it's time for announcements for the quarter. And I turn to Velina, and I tell her, okay, if we go through, now we can. There's no way we lose. It's just not possible. If we now go through the quarter, it's impossible we lose the final. And they announce we go through the quarter. If you remember, I turn to you, I hug you, and I begin to cry tears because strong men cry. I cried like 6 times at that UDC and all these things because we were going through because we had a second how do you say a second lean on life and all of these types of things. Uh, and by the way, how do you say? And then we go into the semi and we win the semi relatively easily. We have a good position and all these things. Um, in the end, however, very sadly, we go through the ESL semi, but Mihailo and Lazarchuk do not go through the ESL semi. Very sadly, I don't think they proved their case or whatever the fuck. So they didn't manage to get through. So what happens is we then get the final. We're closing opposition. It was the motion about God and whatever. And we're thinking of some arguments to run about, killing God is bad, we're not this type. And I say, what if suffering is good? This is after prep time. We're in the debate right now. Daniela is making her speech, leader of opposition. I turn to her and I say, to Velina, I say, suffering is good. Let's prove suffering is good. Let's prove that the world God created is a good one because suffering is a good, positive thing that makes us and all these things. And Velina gets up. She runs that case. I think she runs it very, very well. A lot of people don't know this, but at the end of Velina's speech, because it's not visible, Nikki, who is sitting like this, gets up and starts clapping as if Stalin had finished giving a speech and now he needed to show appreciation or else he would be shot in this sort of way, going completely crazy. Everyone is clapping, screaming, all these things. After a round, people tell us brilliant and all these things. We end up winning that round. So what I will say is, Belgrade B, Mihailo and Lazarchuk, they died for our sins and all these things. They sort of walked so we could run. Uh, I credit completely winning Euros to these guys who had the balls to take a risk in the fucking out round where they could have very easily just ran something boring and got on a second. No, no, they died for our sins. So this is the pivotal moment of UEC, the most important thing.
Do they know this story, by the way?
I don't think so. I think this is the first time I'm telling it to white people, to the wider population and all these things.
Right.
No, but no, Mikhailo and Lazar too, they're in my heart forever.
Nice, nice. Well, you heard it first on the Structural Reasons podcast, everybody. Um, great stuff, great stuff. It's a great story. I did think that Velina had a great speech, and I'm happy that you were comfortable enough as a team and trust each other enough to kind of like mid debate change strategy or like go with the completely new strategy that you just came up with. I think this is like you need to be on a very high level, not only as debaters but as a team to pull something like that off. And this is important as a lesson for everybody else. That like team dynamics are hugely important. This is a team game uh, from that perspective. Okay,
Yeah.
I have two more questions for you, and then like interesting mini game at the end. Um, uh, they're not very surprising, but who do you think is the greatest debater of all time and why?
So I don't know. I don't think I can say Rumen here. I think I have to actually stop trolling and go seriously in this sort of way. So I think that there is a divide in greatest between the best speakers of all time and the most influential speakers of all time, and I think it's very hard to rank between them. Like there are speakers who I don't think are the capital B best, but are super influential to debating, And there are speakers who I think are very, very good, but are maybe not like the most influential. And it's kind of hard to do it in between. Who I think the best speakers are Harish, very simple choice. If a computer could debate, the computer would debate like Harish debates. It's very hard to find, which is ironic because he beat the computer, but it's very hard to find a sort of identifiable weaknesses in Harish's game. He just is very efficient in the way he does everything, and he does everything at a high level, except of course bench weighing, which he just doesn't believe in, which is he's a bad debater for that. This is the old man yelling at clouds moment. But outside of this, he is essentially a flawless speaker. I think another one of the best speakers of all time is Lee Chin Wei. Another, I don't think, super controversial pick. Lee Chin Wei is probably the highest. Like Harish always says this: the best speakers are the ones who are strategic, analytical, and stylistic. Lee Chin Wei was strategic, analytical, and stylistic. He did all of these things at a very high level. Incredibly difficult to beat him, I think. He made really, really, really good second speeches. Um, Deputy is especially amazing, and he has that one whip in the Macau Tournament of Champions, which is an all-time great whip. And I think the third best speaker is Tech Wei Tan. Again, analytical, strategic, stylistic. Very, very difficult to do better PMs than him. I would really struggle extending on him if I saw him. Like, I'm not sure how I would beat Tech Wei Tan and all of these things. Now, the most influential speakers, I think many of them, with a little bit of game planning and all these things, are beatable. Not by me per se, but by other people. But the reason they're beatable is because they've influenced the game so much that everyone now needs to do what they do and all these things. Like, the perfect example is Miller. I think if Miller spoke right now, he would not be the best speaker in the world. He'd be very, very good, but a lot of people would be able to beat him. The reason this is true is because Miloš is so influential on how debating looks like now, because you have to be able to frame, otherwise you just lose, because he showcased this obvious sort of weakness in this kind of debating thing that now everybody needs to be able to do it. So I think that Miloš is arguably maybe the most influential speaker. He's especially of the current generation by far the most influential speaker. And I think this definitely positions him as one of the great speakers of all time. I think the other really, really influential speaker is Sheng Wu Li. Again, I think Sheng Wu Li would lose two speeches now. Maybe I'm just a zoomer and all these things, but I think Sheng Wu Li did not do everything perfectly. But Cheng Wu Li was so important in shifting debating to what it is now, to be more analytical and all of these types of things, more concrete. So I think he's definitely like one of the most influential speakers, one of the greatest speakers, sort of all time. Um, and finally, the very boring answer, the person who is simultaneously one of the best speakers of all time and one of the most influential speakers of all time, it's Dan Lahaf. Of course, it's Dan Lahaf. Dan Lahaf made everyone debate the way they debate currently. Uh, Dan Lahaf was also arguably the best speaker in the world in his time. I mean, if you want to say someone else, you could, but you'd be wrong. Like, no, MDG was not better than Dan Lahaf was. I'm sorry, EPL fanboys, you're just wrong here. But I think he is the one who combines both of these aspects very, very well. So I think he's probably the greatest speaker of all time. I think this is how the comparison works.
Interesting that you bring in influence. I think you're the first one to bring influence. Like some of the things that you said, obviously people kind of factored in, but you did specifically characterize influence, which I think is like kind of fair enough. I think this is also like kind of similar to how people look at like who is the goat in, like, for example, sports in terms of like influencing the game. I think like, yeah, it's interesting. I do kind of feel like Harish is kind of like LeBron James of debating, and uh, like Shen Wu or uh, Dan Lahaf are more like the Michael Jordan of debating in that kind of sense. Obviously, like,
You know why this is? I actually think I have a reason for why this is.
yeah.
Uh, Harish adapts to the meta much more than the meta adapts to Harish. I think this is a factor in why he's one of the best speakers of all time. If you look at a 2010 or even 2013 speech of Harish, it is not the same as him in 2016 or him now. He changes to fit what is required of him to win, which is why he doesn't influence the meta in as much of a pronounced way as, say, Milos does, or Shengu does, or Dan Lahav does. But it's probably why he's, I'm sorry, better than some of them, if not all of them.
Yeah, I think an interesting fact that I didn't think about so much before, but kind of stick in my head is like when they did the simple math. Um, I think it was Ron who did it, like a small comparison of like back at that point. I think they haven't factored in the most recent worlds, but when you look at the statistics of majors and which CA teams were able to produce the most balanced motion sets by a mile, the highlight or like the different factors is two people that were involved in the most balanced motion sets of majors, and it's Dan Lahav and Milosh in this particular sense. So they've actually like worked
And
together.
Milos,
And Milosh, yes. These are the two like statistics in common for these particular motion sets. And their motion sets are like significantly more balanced. It's obvious statistically. If what I'm trying to say, obviously, like I haven't looked at the particular data, but I trust Ron much more than I trust myself with data anyway. So I'm